I hiccuped for the first time in the 11th year of my reign, in the middle of a war treaty. The Ridge Alpha had his hand out. I had my seal in mine. 40 men stood along the walls of my hall with their breath held, because the last time our two packs had met over a table, 4 of them had left it on their backs. I set the seal in the wax. I opened my mouth to say the words that end a feud, and my body made a sound. It was not a growl. A growl I could have used. It was a small, wet, ridiculous knock in my throat, the noise a boy makes when he has drunk his milk too fast, and it went off in that silent hall like a stone dropped in a well. The Ridge Alpha stared at me. "Continue," I said. I hiccuped again. There is no dignity available to a man in that moment. None. You may stand a full head above every wolf in the room. You may have taken the throat out of the last king who lied to you. You may have 30 scars and a crown that weighs as much as a helm, and none of it will save you, because your own chest has decided to speak before you do. I got through the treaty. I want that on the record. I signed, and I clasped his forearm, and I said the words of peace, and between the words I hiccuped 7 more times, and by the 9th the Ridge Alpha's shoulders were shaking and he had to look at the ceiling, and my war captain Ganner had gone the color of raw dough, and my steward Peck was studying his own hands as though he had only just been introduced to them. 9, then it stopped, as cleanly as a door shutting. "Are you ill?" the Ridge Alpha asked out in the courtyard where his riders were mounting. "No." "Because I would not want it said I signed a treaty with a dying man." "I am not dying," I said. "I am hiccuping." He laughed all the way down the clover road. I could hear him laughing past the second hedge. That is where it begins. Not with a prophecy, not with a mark burning on anybody's hand, not with a moon or a mirror or an old woman muttering over bones. It begins with a noise in my throat, and with my wolf, that great gray ruin of an animal who has run beside me since I was 9 years old, who has killed for me and bled for me, and never once in his life mocked me, sitting in the courtyard dust with his ears up and his mouth open, laughing at me too. I am Ossian Carr, Alpha King of Compold. I want you to understand the kingdom before you understand the rest of it, because the kingdom is the whole trouble. We are a low country. No mountains, no snow to speak of, no cliffs for a poet to fall off. What we have is clover, miles of it, white and pink and dizzying from the sharrow hedges in the east to the water meadows in the west, and set out in that clover, in long straight ranks like an army that has decided to sit down, are the hives. 10,000 of them. Compold has been sweet since before it had a name. Our wealth is honey and our drink is mead, and our law is written on wax tablets that smell faintly of flowers. And for 3 weeks at the end of every summer the whole country goes mad in the way only a very sensible people can go mad. The sweetening. The combs come in. The presses run day and night. Every hall in the kingdom throws its doors open. Every wolf in the kingdom is drunk by the 3rd day. Every child in the kingdom is sticky to the elbow. And everybody, from the war captain to the woman who sweeps the mill, is stung at least twice and pretends not to notice. You cannot walk 100 paces in the sweetening without your boot soles clicking. The air hums so loudly that men shout at each other over the length of a table, without knowing they are shouting. And at the end of it comes the harvest court, and at the harvest court comes the 9 tastings, and at the 9 tastings the king of Compold drinks 9 cups of the year's first mead in front of his people and pronounces the year good. 11 times I had done it. 11 years I had held the cup up and drunk and said the word and heard the hall roar. 11 years I had ruled a country whose entire idea of itself was that it was sweet. I had no mate. My counsel reminded me of this the way water reminds a stone. I was 38, unwed and childless, and Compold has a rule older than its throne. A king who has not named a Luna by his 12th sweetening loses the cloverite, and the hives, and the hedges, and the whole soft green heart of the country goes back to the 4 old holds who seeded it. This is not a cruelty. It is simply what our great-grandfathers wrote down when they were drunk on this same mead. and now it is law, and law does not care whether you have found anyone you can stand to look at across a breakfast table. So there was a woman chosen for me. Her name was Senet Foy of the Western Meadows, and I want to say clearly before anything else in this story happens, that she was not a wicked woman and nothing bad happened to her. She was clever, she was patient, she had a laugh like a stick dragged along a fence, and she came to Compold in the first week of that sweetening with 11 wagons and no illusions whatever. "You don't love me," she said on the first evening, eating an apple in my library. "No." "Good, loving is very expensive. Do you like me?" "Yes," I said truthfully, because she had already told my counsel to their faces that their clover accounts were a disgrace, which was correct. "That will hold up," said Senet Foy and bit her apple, and that was our betrothal. 6 days later, I hiccuped 9 times during a treaty. 4 days after that, I hiccuped 9 times in the middle of the morning judgments, while a man was explaining to me at length why his neighbor's fence had walked 40 paces during the winter. 2 days after that, at dawn, standing alone at the window of my own chamber with nobody in the room but the wolf, I hiccuped 9 times, and Toll lifted his gray head off his paws and looked at me with what I can only describe as delight. I began then to do what I do. I am not a clever man in the way singers are clever. I am a careful one. I take a thing apart and lay the pieces on a table and count them, and this is the only reason I am alive and my father is not. I sent for the physician. Master Havel had served 3 kings and buried 2 of them, and he came into my chamber with the expression of a man who has been asked to explain the sea. He looked at my throat. He looked at my tongue. He put his ear to my ribs and listened to my heart for so long that I began to wonder whether he had gone to sleep. "You are the healthiest man I have ever touched," he said at last, sounding personally insulted. "I am aware." "Hiccups," he said, "are wind. Wind is caused by hurry, by heat, by mead, by laughing at table, and by grief. Are you grieving?" "No." "Are you hurrying?" "Constantly." "Then stop hurrying," said Master Havel and prescribed a fright. I want to be fair to Master Havel. A fright is the accepted remedy in Compold, and has been for 200 years, and every child in the kingdom knows that if you hiccup you must be seized suddenly from behind by someone who loves you. The difficulty is finding someone willing to seize an alpha king suddenly from behind. Ganner would not do it. He said with real feeling that he had a wife. Peck would not do it. Peck said that he had served my father, and that my father had once broken a man's wrist for touching his shoulder, and that he did not believe the fruit had fallen especially far from the tree. In the end it was done by a kitchen boy of 14 who was offered a silver piece and did not understand what he was agreeing to, and he came up behind me in the corridor and shouted "Boo!" with his eyes shut, and I turned around and he fainted. I did not hiccup, but it was not the fright that stopped it. It had already stopped. 9 and done. That was the thing about it, you see. Always 9. Never 8, never 11. 9 in a run, sometimes closed together like knuckles rapping on a door and sometimes strung out over a quarter of an hour, but always 9. And then silence, and then hours or days of nothing until it began again. I began to keep a tally. I am going to be honest about this, because there is no version of this story in which I come off well, and I have stopped trying to arrange one. The Alpha King of Compold, in the 11th year of his reign, with a treaty to enforce and a harvest coming in and a betrothal on his hands, took a leaf of good wax paper and a pencil and began to record, with the date and the hour, every occasion on which his own body embarrassed him. 14th day of the sweetening, dawn at the window, 9. 14th day, mid-morning in the great hall walking, 9. 15th day, nothing. 16th day, dawn at the window, 9, then again at noon on the east stair, 9. I looked at the tally for a week and found nothing in it, no pattern in the hours. It happened when I was standing and when I was seated, when I had eaten and when I had not, when I had drunk mead, and when I had drunk nothing but water for 2 days on purpose, which, during the sweetening, in a country where the water is served warm from a barrel that has held mead since the reign of my grandfather, is a considerable act of self-denial that nobody thanked me for. "It's the mead," said Ganner. "I stopped the mead." "Then it's stopping the mead," said Ganner. "It's well known that the sudden withdrawal of mead—" "Ganner." "It's the smoke," said Peck. "The hive smoke, it gets in the throat." So I had the smoking stopped in the near yards for 3 days, and the bee-masters looked at me as though I had ordered the sun to be taken down and cleaned, and the honey harvest of the near yards was set back a week, and I hiccuped 9 times on the morning of the 2nd day while standing in a smokeless field. Senet Foy watched all of this with her chin on her fist. "You have made a chart," she said. "I have made a record. It has columns. It has 3 columns. "Ossian," said my betrothed, "you are the most frightening man in 4 kingdoms, and you have made a chart of your hiccups." She reached over and turned the wax leaf around and read it, and something moved across her face that I did not like, not amusement. Something more careful than amusement. "How very interesting," she said, and gave it back, and asked me whether I intended to do anything about the accounts of the western hedges, and would not speak of the chart again for 11 days. And the wolf laughed at me. Not aloud. Toll had not made a sound above a huff in 6 years. He was old, grayed to the muzzle, stiff in the hips, and he spent his days sprawled across whichever flagstone had most recently been warmed by the sun, which meant he had to be stepped over roughly 40 times a day by everyone in the castle. But a wolf laughs with his whole body. The mouth opens. The ears come forward. The tail thumps twice and no more, because more would be undignified. Every single time it happened, Toll did that. He knew. I understood that within the first week, the way you understand that another man in a room has seen something you have not. He knew, and he was not going to tell me, and there was nothing whatever I could do about it, because a wolf's silence is the oldest silence in the world. I asked him. I want that recorded too. On the 17th night of the sweetening, the Alpha King of Compold sat on the floor of his own chamber with his back against the bed, and took his wolf's gray face in both hands and said, "Tell me." And the wolf looked at me for a long moment with those yellow eyes that have watched me do every foolish and every unforgivable thing I have ever done, and then he licked my wrist and went asleep. Here is what I want to say about the bond, and I want to say it now, before the story goes any further, because the songs will lie to you. The songs will tell you a mate mark burns to life on the palm. They will tell you the wolf goes still, or rises, or howls in the chest like a wind through a hall. They will tell you a scent finds you across a crowded room and pulls you like a hooked fish. Every one of those songs was written by somebody it did not happen to. What happened to me was 9 hiccups. There was no mark on my hand or hers. There is not one to this day. I have looked. There was no true form waiting inside her, no white wolf, no royal blood, no seal that woke when she touched it. My own wolf never knew her, never once in all the years did he treat her as anything other than a very good source of warmth on a cold morning. Whatever passed between us did not come through any of the doors the songs describe. It came through the one door nobody guards, the small, ugly one at the back, and it announced itself by making me look like a fool in front of the Ridge Alpha. I have thought about why, and I have an answer, though it is not the kind of answer that goes into a song. I think it is because I would not have listened to anything else. Now the pattern. I found it on the 19th day of the sweetening, at dawn, at my window, and I found it because I had finally done the thing I should have done in the first week, which was to stop looking at myself and look out. My chamber sits above the east door of the castle, which is not the great door and not the kitchen door but the working door, the one the yards use. At dawn it is busy in the way. A place is busy when nobody is watching it. The milk carts, the ashmen, the 2 boys who fight every morning over who carries the water and every morning carry it together. I had been standing at that window for 11 years and had seen none of them. I hiccuped. And I looked down, and a woman was crossing the yard with a basket on her hip. I hiccuped again, and she went on walking, and I counted. And by the time she had reached the arch of the east gate and gone through it, I had hiccuped 9 times. I stood there for a long moment with my hand on the sill. Then I said aloud to the empty room, "That is a coincidence." Behind me, the wolf's tail thumped twice. The next dawn I was at the window before the sky was properly gray, and I waited, and my heart was doing something I did not care for. And at the exact moment that the woman with the basket came out of the shadow of the granary, I hiccuped, and I kept hiccuping until she was gone, and it was 9, and then it stopped. I did it a third morning to be certain, because 3 is a number and 2 is an accident. 9. She was not remarkable. I need you to understand that I was not struck. There was no golden light. She was perhaps 30-odd in a brown dress gone the color of a dead leaf from washing, and she walked the way people walk who have carried things a long way for a long time, flat, unhurried from the hip. Her hair was tied back with a bit of twine. Her hands, even from a full story up, were dark to the wrist, stained brown as a saddle. And in her basket, when she passed under my window, I could see what she carried: gray-green stalks, ragged, thorny, ugly, wormwood and rue, and the tall purple thistle that grows in the shallow ditches and that no honest wolf touches. "Who is that?" I said to Peck at breakfast, in a voice that I intended to be idle, and that came out like a man ordering an arrest. Peck came to the window. He looked, and I watched my steward, a man who had once told my father to his face in his cups that his poetry was bad, do a very small thing with his mouth: a tightening, a distaste he had not chosen to feel and could not entirely put away. "That's the bitter keeper," he said. "The what?" "Bracken's girl, Ilsa, keeps the sharrow." He was already moving away from the window, back to the table, back to the accounts. "The bitter garden, sire." "I know what the sharrow is." "Then you know what she is," said Peck, and poured me my tea, and that would have been the end of it, because that was how it had always ended for 40 years for everyone. Now I have to explain the sharrow, and it will take a moment, and I ask your patience because it is the hinge upon which the whole of my kingdom turns, and I did not know that either. A hive cannot live on sweetness. This is not a proverb. It is a fact about bees, known to every bee master in every country in the world, and known in Compold longest of all. A colony that takes nothing but nectar, year on year, in a country planted end to end with clover, sickens. The gut of the thing goes wrong. The brood goes soft. Something rots in the comb slowly over seasons, so slowly that no single year is bad enough to frighten anyone. The old remedy is bitterness. Wormwood, rue, tansy, thistle, the sharp scouring greens. You plant them in hedges and ditches through the clover, and the bees work them alongside the sweet, and the hive stays clean. So Compold, 300 years ago, made a garden of them in the east, 12 acres of ugly, thorny, medicinal green called the sharrow, and made a keeper of it, and gave the keeper a house and a wage and a place at the harvest court. And then Compold got rich, and got proud, and decided that it was a sweet country. You cannot legislate against a hedge. Nobody ever announced that the sharrow was shameful. What happened was slower and much stupider than that. The bitter hedges were let go, one by one, because clover pays and thistle does not. The bitter keeper's place at the harvest court was moved down the table, and then to the end of the table, and then to a stool by the door. Nobody sat beside her, because she smelled of rue, and rue is a smell that lives in cloth and will not be talked out of it. Nobody married the bitter keeper's daughters. It was said, and I had said it myself, without ever once hearing myself say it, that a thing was sharrow when it was necessary and unpleasant. The sharrow taxes, the sharrow judgments, the sharrow work. The bitter keeper of Compold was not mocked. Nobody threw anything. Nobody laughed. It was worse than that, and I have had 30 years to find the right word for it, and the word is this. She was avoided the way a doorway is avoided when there is a puddle in it, without malice, without a thought, without anybody involved ever having to decide anything at all. And she came up out of the sharrow every dawn with a basket of the ugly green on her hip, and walked across my yard, and put it where it was wanted, and went home. 9 hiccups. I told nobody. I will not pretend that was nobility. I told nobody because I did not believe it, and because a king who believes his hiccups are a woman is a king with an empty throne within a fortnight. Instead, I did what I have always done, which is to set out to disprove the thing that frightens me. The tests took 4 days. Day 1, I stood at the window at dawn and did not look down. I looked at the ceiling and thought hard about the Western hedge accounts. She passed. I hiccuped 9 times. Day 2, I was not at the window at all. I had Peck wake me an hour early, and I rode out to the near yards, 600 paces from the castle, and stood among the smoking hives with the bee masters. And at the hour when she would have crossed the yard, nothing happened. I hiccuped once at noon and then not again, and I want to be clear that a single hiccup at noon means nothing whatever, and I was not disappointed. I rode back at a canter. That was for other reasons. Day 3, I stood at the window and she did not come. Nothing. Peck told me later that she had gone straight down to the mill with the cut rue and not through the yard at all. Day 4, I broke. I took the east door at dawn and walked out into my own yard like a man going nowhere. And I stood by the granary in the gray light with my heart going like a boy's. And Toll came with me and lay down in the wet and watched. And when she came around the corner of the wall with her basket, I hiccuped so hard that I had to put a hand on the granary door. She stopped. Nobody had ever looked at me the way that woman looked at me, and it was not awe and it was not fear. It was the flat, assessing, faintly irritated look of somebody who has come across an obstruction on a path they use every day. "Sire," she said. I hiccuped. "Yes," I said, with as much of my father in the word as I could manage. She stood there. I stood there. The wolf lay in the wet dirt with his tail going. I hiccuped 4 more times and she watched me do it, and there was not the smallest twitch anywhere in her face, no laugh held down, no pity, nothing. She simply waited with a basket of thistle on her hip until my body had finished saying what it had to say. 9. Silence. "It's a fright you want," she said, "or a spoonful of vinegar. Vinegar is better. The fright only works if you're not expecting it and you'd hear anyone coming." And she went on across the yard and out through the arch and was gone. And I stood by the granary in the dark with my hand still flat on the door. "Well," I said to the wolf. The wolf yawned. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and turned it over and over the way I would turn an enemy's letter, looking for the second meaning. And at some hour before dawn, I found the thing that had been snagging me, and it was not the hiccups at all. It was that she had told me what to do. Do you understand? I had been king for 11 years. Nobody in that time had told me what to do. My council advised. My steward suggested. Senate Foy, who was cleverer than any of them, informed and let me arrive. Ganner obeyed. Even Master Havel, prescribing a fright, had prescribed it to the crown and not to me. A woman with a basket of thistle had looked at the Alpha King of Compold at dawn and told him to take vinegar. I got up and I lit a candle and I went and looked at my chart, my ridiculous 3-column chart. And I stood there a long time and thought about the fact that I did not know how many hives had died in Compold in the last 5 years, and that I could not have told you the name of a single bitter keeper before this week, and that when Peck had said then you know what she is, I had let it go by, and that in 11 years of kingship, the number of people who had said a thing to me that I did not want to hear was somewhere very close to none. Nobody rules a country. What a man rules is the ring of people who will speak to him. That is the whole kingdom, and mine was 6 paces across, and every wolf in it loved me. I put the chart in the fire and watched the wax go black and run. Then I went down to the sharrow. I went at dawn, alone, on foot, which caused a small crisis in the guardroom that I did not stay to witness. And I went east along the ditch road with the hum coming up out of the clover on either side of me like the sound of a distant crowd. and Toll ran ahead the way he had not run in 2 years, and I came over the last hedge bank and stopped. I had never once in my life been to the bitter garden. It was not ugly. That is the first thing I have to set down, because I had been told my whole life that it was ugly, in the way you are told things when nobody has looked. It was 12 acres of green, gray-green, blue-green, the soft, dusty green of wormwood, the black green of rue, the tall, hard, purple-headed thistle standing up in ranks, and the whole of it was moving. It was moving because there were more bees in that garden than I have seen in one place before or since. They were on the thistle in a haze. The noise was not the hum of the clover. It was lower and busier, and it went into the bones of the face. The smell hit me second. It is not a smell you like. It is the smell that comes off a cut you are cleaning, the smell of a room where someone has been ill and the windows have been opened at last. And it is not sweet, not in the smallest particular. And after 2 weeks of the sweetening, with my boots clicking on every floor in the castle and my tongue coated and my head thick, and the whole country drunk on flowers. After 2 weeks of that, I stood on the hedge bank of the Sharrow and I breathed in, and my head cleared like a bell being struck. She was at the far end with a hook in her hand, cutting. She did not stop cutting when she saw me. This, too, I have thought about. Any other soul in Compold would have dropped the hook and gone down on one knee in the wet, and I would have said rise and thought nothing about it for the rest of my life. Ilse Bracken looked up and looked back down and finished the stalk she was on, and laid it in the basket, and then came along the row to me, wiping the hook on her apron. I hiccuped 4 times while she was walking. "You've come for the vinegar," she said. "No." "Then you should have," she said. "It's a great deal simpler than whatever this is. I have commanded men in a shield line. I have stood in front of my own uncle and told him what he had done and watched the room turn against him. I want to tell you what I said to the bitter keeper of Compold on that first morning, on the bank of the Sharrow, at dawn, with the bees roaring in the thistle and my body still knocking softly in my chest. I said, "How many of my hives are dying?" And she went absolutely still. She was still for so long that I heard the whole garden. Then she set her basket down in the wet grass, very carefully, the way you put down something you have carried a long way, and she straightened, and she looked me in the face, and her jaw was hard. "Say that again," she said. "How many of my hives are dying?" "Who told you they were?" "Nobody," I said. "Nobody has ever told me anything. That is what I have come about." And Ilse Bracken, who had not, so far as I was ever able to discover, sat down at a table with another wolf of Compold in 9 years, put her brown hands over her face, just for a moment, just for the length of one breath, and then took them away and said, in a voice with sand in it, "Sire, I have written to your steward every autumn for 6 years. The letters were in a wooden box in her house, because she had kept the copies. Of course she had kept the copies. She made me tea I could not drink. It was rue and something else, and it tasted like a scolding. And she put the box on the table between us and lifted the lid, and I sat in a bitter keeper's kitchen with my crown left up at the castle and read 6 years of my own kingdom's death in a small, square, laborious hand. The yields of the eastern yards, hive by hive, the brood counts, the weight of the winter combs, dropping, a pound here, 2 pounds there, never enough in 1 year for a bee-master to swear to. The date the marrow hedge was grubbed out for clover. The date the ninefold hedge went. The map she had drawn herself, in ink she had made from oak galls because she could not afford the other kind. Showing where the bitter hedges had stood in her grandmother's time, a net of gray lines across the whole of Compold, thistle and rue running through the clover like the veins in a leaf, and beside it on the same sheet what was left of them, 12 acres, 1 garden, 1 keeper. "They're not dying," she said, standing over me with her arms folded. "That's the trouble. If they died you'd have noticed. They're getting weaker by a little every year, and every year the bee-masters plant more clover to make up the honey, and the clover is what's doing it, and next year they'll plant more. A hive full of sweet and nothing else goes soft. It goes soft in the gut and then in the brood, and then one wet spring it goes all together, all of them everywhere in a fortnight. She stopped. It'll be a wet spring in 3 years or 5. It won't be a bad year. It'll be the year. Peck read these letters. Peck read the first one, she said. He wrote back that the bee masters had it in hand. I expect he was told they had it in hand. I expect the man who told him was told it too. Nobody's lying, sire. That's the part that took me longest to understand. And you kept writing. I kept writing. For 6 years with no answer. She shrugged, and it was not a brave shrug. It was an impatient one, and she took the kettle off and started scouring it because standing still had become impossible for her. It's my garden, she said. Somebody has to say what's in it. I sat in that kitchen a long while. Outside, the sparrow roared quietly with the bees that would not go into the clover, and beyond it my kingdom hummed its sweeter, thinner note, and 11 miles west of us the presses were running day and night, and my council were awake by now, and discovering that their king had walked out of the east door on foot like a thief. Why did nobody tell me, I said, that I have a woman in the east of my country who knows this? Ilse Bracken put the kettle down. Because I smell of rue, she said. She said it flatly, as a bee master would tell you the wind was from the north. Not with self-pity. Not even, I think, with much anger anymore. Anger of that kind will not keep for 9 years. It goes to something drier. She looked at me across her own kitchen, and I watched her decide whether to say the rest. And she was a woman who had spent her whole life deciding not to say the rest. And something in that morning, the king on her chair, perhaps, or the 6 years of letters lying open on the table with his hands on them, pushed her over. You've a word for me, she said. The whole kingdom does. You don't hear it because you've never had to, Sharo. You say it about a tax you don't like. Ganner said it in my hearing about a duty he was set that was beneath him. My mother heard the same word from your father. She wiped her hands. It means necessary and unpleasant, and let's not have it at the table. That's what I am. Not hated, sire. I'd have preferred hated. Hated has a shape you can push against. Do you know, I said slowly, that I hiccup 9 times whenever you pass me? I have no idea why I said it. I had ridden through a burning gate at 22 with better sense than that. Ilse Bracken looked at me for a long moment. I had noticed, she said, that you were doing a great deal of it, and turned back to the kettle, and her ears had gone red, and I sat in a bitter keeper's kitchen in my working coat and felt something turn over in my chest that had nothing to do with wind. She would not come to the castle. I want to put that first, because I spent the ride back composing, in my head, the gracious scene in which I installed the bitter keeper of Comhold at my council table, and everybody had the decency to be ashamed. I had it arranged down to the chair. It is remarkable how much of a man's mind is taken up with arranging scenes in which other people are ashamed. I sent Peck for her that afternoon. He came back alone, holding his hat, and said that Mistress Bracken sent her respects and would be in the sparrow, cutting, as she was cutting every day of the sweetening, and that if the king wanted her, he knew the road. Ganner laughed, then he looked at my face and stopped. She refused a summons, he said. It wasn't a summons, I said. It was an invitation, and she has work. Sire, it's the same thing. No, I said. Ganner, it is not. And the fact that neither of us has known the difference for 11 years is the reason my hives are rotting. And I took the wooden box out from under my arm and put it on the council table, and opened it, and pushed it down the length of the wood so that it slid to a stop in front of my steward. The room went quiet. Peck did not touch it. He looked at the box for a long time, and I watched an old man's face go through something I would not wish on anyone, and then he took out the topmost letter, the one from 6 years ago, the first one, on cheap paper, and turned it over, and there on the back in his own small clerkly hand was the note he had written to himself and forgotten before the ink dried. Be masters have it in hand. I remember it, he said. Do you? No, said Peck, I don't. I am saying that I must have, that is my hand. He set it down. He straightened his shoulders in a way that I recognized because I had seen my father's men do it before walking out to be hanged. "Sire, I will go." "Sit down. I have served 3. Peck," I said. "If I dismiss you this afternoon, then by supper every man in this castle will have decided that the trouble was Peck, and that it has been dealt with, and that they may go back to sleep. You are worth more to me alive and mortified. Sit down." He sat down. Ganner, who had gone the color of an unlit candle, sat down rather faster than he needed to. And then I made my mistake, which was to tell them. Not about the hiccups. I'm not that great a fool. I told them the rest of it, the hedges, the grubbing, the map with its gray veins, the letters, the slow soft rot in the gut of every hive in Compold, and the wet spring that was coming in 3 years or 5 to take the whole of it in a fortnight. And I told it well, in the voice I use for war. And when I finished I looked around my council table at 9 faces and understood, with a coldness in my stomach, that not one of them believed me. Oh, they were troubled. They were troubled the way you are troubled by a man who tells you he has seen a light on the marsh. Old Marrow of the Western Yards, who had kept bees for 50 years and whose hands were as brown as hers, said very kindly that hive weights had always risen and fallen. "Sire, always, it went in cycles." His own grandfather had said the same, and the hives were still here. The Mead Guild's man said, with the greatest respect, that a 10th part of the clover taken out for thistle was a 10th part of the year's mead, and had the king considered the Ridge Treaty, which was written in tons. Ganner said nothing at all, because Ganner had recognized the word Sharrow coming and had gone white around the mouth. And my chancellor, Delter, who is a decent and frightened man, said the thing that mattered. "Sire," he said, "whose word is this on?" "The bitter keeper's." I watched it happen. I watched 9 faces, none of them cruel, none of them, I swear to you, thinking anything at all. I watched the word go into them and come out the other side having quietly changed shape. The bitter keepers. And Delter nodded slowly and made a note, and I knew as certainly as I have ever known anything that the note said nothing, and that the matter was closed, and that they would talk about my mood on the way out. "Bring her here," said Delter, "and we will hear her." So they heard her. She came in the end on the 22nd day of the sweetening, because I went down and asked, in her kitchen, standing, with my hands behind my back like a boy sent to the schoolmaster. And she looked at me for a while and said, "They'll not believe me either, sire." And I said, "I know." And she put on her second dress and came. I hiccuped 9 times as she entered the council chamber. The room heard it. Delter's pen stopped. Old Marrow rose out of his chair, thinking, I suppose, that his king was choking. The Mead Guild's man looked at the ceiling with an expression of the profoundest sympathy. And Ganner, who had faced a boar with a broken spear, and who I would trust with my life on any field in the world, put his fist against his mouth and made a noise like a kettle. Ilse Bracken walked to the foot of the table and stood, because nobody offered her a chair, and waited with her hands folded until I had finished. 9 silence. "Mistress Bracken," I said, "tell them what you told me." And she did. She told it flatly, in that square, laborious voice that matched her handwriting, hive by hive and year by year. The marrow hedge and the 9-fold and the 14 ditches, and I sat at the head of my own table, and watched the men I had ruled for 11 years listen to her with perfect courtesy and absolute deafness, nodding at the right places, waiting, the way you wait for a boar at a wedding. When she came to the wet spring, old Marrow smiled at her. It was a warm smile. It was the smile of a man being patient with a girl. "50 years I've kept bees, mistress," he said. "I know, sir," said Ilse. 61 of your hives came out of the marrow yard last spring at under 9 pounds. You wrote it in your own book. I copied it from your own book, sir, in your own scale in April, when you let me stand at the door." The smile went off old Marrow's face like a lamp blown out. He looked at her. He looked down at his brown hands, and he was silent so long that Delter coughed, and I understood, watching him, that I was seeing the only man in the room who could actually be reached, because he was the only one who had ever weighed a comb himself. 9 pounds, he said. Well, and I have loved him for it ever since. That's true, I told myself it was the rain. It's always the rain, said Ilsa. It's never the rain. And that was as far as we got, because the Mead Guild's man began to speak about the Ridge Treaty and the tons, and Delter made another note, and the sun moved across the table, and at the end of 2 hours my council resolved in writing, that the matter of the eastern hedges should be laid before the Bee-Masters' assembly at the Harvest Court, for consideration in the coming year. The coming year, consideration. They filed out. She stood at the foot of the table with her hands folded until the last of them had gone, and then she picked up her map and rolled it, and I came down the length of that room feeling for the first time in my reign like something small. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be, it went better than the letters." She tied the map with a bit of twine. She tied everything with a bit of twine, that woman. I think she was born with a coil of it, and she glanced up at me. "You've gone very red." "I have not." "Sire," said Ilsa Bracken, "you were the only one who heard me, and it did no good at all, and you're standing there looking as though someone has struck your dog. If you're going to take this personally, you'll be no use to me by Michaelmas." I laughed. I remember that I was surprised by the sound. She went out through the east door with her map under her arm, and I hiccuped 9 more times, and Ganner, who was waiting in the corridor and who had been thinking hard for 2 hours, said, "Sire, forgive me, does that only happen when—" "Ganner," I said, because I could not help noticing. "Ganner." "Sire," he said, "I once called a duty shero in her hearing. In the yard, I remember it. It was a fence count in the rain. He was looking at the floor. I didn't know she was there. I mean, I knew she was there. I saw her. I didn't—" He stopped and started again, and this is why he is my war captain. "It didn't cost me anything to say. That's what I've been sitting with. It cost me nothing, and I've thought about it every day since you brought that box in." "Then go and count the eastern ditches," I said, "in the rain, and take 4 men, and when she tells you where to dig, dig." He went. He dug for 11 days. It is the only work of that autumn I did not have to fight for, and Compold has a hedge along the 9-fold ditch because of it, and Ganner will tell you to this day that the hedge is his and he is a liar. Now the vinegar. I took it. I want that on record too. On the 24th day of the sweetening, the Alpha King of Compold sat alone in his chamber at dawn with a spoon in one hand and a cup of black vinegar in the other, and swallowed it, gagging in the pale light, and set the cup down and waited. The east door creaked below. The basket came around the corner of the granary. I hiccuped 9 times. "So much for the vinegar," I said aloud to the wolf, who was lying on the warm flagstone by the hearth with his chin on his paws and who did not even bother to lift his head. He just thumped his tail. Twice. He had stopped pretending some days before. "Here is what I have not said about Toll, and I ought to, because it is the only place in this account where anyone tried to make an omen out of any of it. On the 26th day, the whole castle saw my wolf follow her. She came in the morning with the basket, and Toll, who had not walked further than the kitchen door in a year, hauled himself up off his flagstone and went out into the yard and fell in at her hip, and paced her the whole length of it and out under the arch, and did not come back until dusk. The kitchen boy told the cook. The cook told the yard. By supper there were 40 people in the corridor telling each other that the king's wolf had chosen the bitter woman, that it was a sign, that in the old days the wolf always knew, that a Luna had been named by a beast in the reign of Car the Silent, and it was in the histories. Peck came to me almost shining with it. He is not a fool. He is a man who has done a wrong and would like the world to have arranged, in advance, a way for him to put it right. "Sire," he said, "the pack is saying." "Peck," I said, "she carries Thistle." "Sire." "Wormhood rue Thistle. Toll is 19 years old. He has a stiffness in his hips that no salve of Havels has touched in 3 winters, and I have watched that woman crush a rue leaf against his hocks with her thumb because she does it for the mill dogs, and he has been following her ever since like a boy after a pie cart. I put down my pen. He is not choosing a Luna. He is chasing a liniment. Peck's face fell so far that I nearly relented. It would be a very good sign, he said sadly. It would be a very convenient sign, I said, and Compold has been eating convenient signs for 40 years, and look at our hives. And that is all the wolf ever did. He is in no song. He lay on the warmest stone in whatever room contained one for another 2 years, and then he died in the sun, and I will not have him made into a prophecy. My wolf never knew her. He liked her the way an old man likes the person who rubs his knee. Whatever it was that had hold of me came through some other door entirely, and it announced itself with a hiccup, and no priest in 4 kingdoms has ever been able to make anything out of it that could be sung. I went down to the Sharrow every dawn after that. I told myself it was the hives. She put me to work within a week, because she could not tolerate a man standing in a garden with his hands behind his back. She gave me a hook and set me to cutting rue, and I cut it badly, I cut it, she said, like a soldier, which is to say too fast and too near the crown, and she took the hook off me twice and showed me and gave it back, and the third time she took it she said, "Sire, you are killing them," and I said, "It's a weed." And Ilse Bracken turned round in the middle of the wet garden with the bees roaring and the thistle and said, "Everything in this country that is worth anything is a weed." I have thought about that sentence for 30 years. She would tell you now that she does not remember saying it, and that she probably only meant the rue. We talked. This is the part I do not know how to set down without making it sound like more than it was, because there was no Bond singing, and no Mark burning, and no moment where the world narrowed to a face. There were 2 people cutting bitter greens in the dark before sunrise for 3 weeks, and one of them was a king, and the other one was the only person in his kingdom who would tell him he was wrong. She told me the eastern yards were mismanaged. She told me the Ridge Treaty was too generous in the second clause and would starve the mill villages. She told me, standing in the wet, with a thistle head in her fist, that my father had been a bad king and a worse man, and that the reason nobody said so was that he had made the saying of it expensive, and that I had never had to make it expensive, because I had simply surrounded myself with people who agreed, and that this was cheaper and worked better. Nobody had said any of that to me. Nobody had ever said any of it to me. And every time she came near me, my chest knocked 9 times, and she would wait it out and go on talking as if I had merely sneezed. I began to look forward to it. That is the thing I cannot explain and have stopped trying to. Somewhere in that fortnight the most humiliating fact of my life became a thing I welcomed, the way you welcome the sound of a horse you know coming up a road you cannot see. I could not tell whether she was in the garden by looking in that gray light. The rows are high, but I always knew. Because I would be walking along the ditch bank thinking of nothing, and my own body would say, "There." 9 times. Senet Foy came to me on the last night of the sweetening. I was in the library. She sat down opposite me and put an apple on the desk and did not eat it, and I understood that we had arrived somewhere. "You burned your chart," she said. "I did. Ossian, I read it before you burned it. I read it 3 times, and I am cleverer than you, and I had it in 4 days." She turned the apple with one finger. "The 14th, the 16th, the 19th, dawn, and then again whenever you were near the east yard. Never on the 15th she took the mill road on the 15th, I asked. Never in the near yard 600 paces out." She looked up. "I have known for a fortnight that my betrothed hiccups at a woman." I did not say anything. There was nothing available. "Don't," said Senet. "Don't do the honorable thing. I have been watching you assemble it all week, and it is going to be very tedious. You are going to tell me that you gave your word, and that the cloverite depends on it, and that you will marry me and be a good and faithful husband, and that I need never know, which I already do, and that some day when we are old this will be a small thing." She picked up the apple. "It is not a small thing. You cannot even stand in a corridor when she walks down it. Senate, I release you, she said. You cannot, the Cloverite. Ossian, listen to me, because this is the only speech I intend to make. She leaned forward, and her face was not soft, and it was not wounded, and I have never been so glad of anything. I came here with 11 wagons and no illusions. I like you. You are a decent man and a better king than your father, and you have never once in 6 weeks pretended to feel anything you did not feel, which is the whole of what I asked for. And if I marry you, I will spend 40 years in a hall watching my husband hold his breath every time a woman crosses the yard, and every year I will get a little smaller, and by the end I will be one of those wives, the ones with the flat voice, and the country will say she was such a clever girl, whatever became of her. I am not going to become that in order to satisfy a law your great-grandfathers wrote when they were drunk. The four holds will take the hedges. Then change the law. You are the king. You have spent 11 years being told what the law is by men who have never read it. She stood and shook out her skirts. Besides, from what I hear, in 3 years or 5 there will be nothing in those hedges worth taking. You believe her? Senate Foy stopped at the door with her hand on the wood. Ossian, she said, I have read her letters. 6 years of a woman writing to men who did not answer, and not once in 6 years does she ask for anything for herself. No wage, no place, no chair at the table. Only, the hives are failing, here are the numbers, here is what to plant. She lifted the apple as though drinking to something. Of course I believe her. I am not an idiot, and neither until quite recently was your steward. She went to the western meadows in the spring and ran the accounts of 4 holds for 20 years and made a great deal of money, and married a man who bred horses and disliked poetry, and she is godmother to my second son, and when she comes to comphold, she still puts her feet up on the furniture. There is no scene in this story in which she is humbled. I would have deserved one. She would not have given it. That left the law, the harvest court, in 8 days. And it left the thing Peck brought me on the last of those 8, which he brought at night, alone, having been 3 days in the muniment room among the wax tablets with a candle, because I had told him to be worth more to me alive and mortified, and he had decided, at 61 years old, to be exactly that. He put the tablet on my desk. He was shaking. The 9 tastings, he said. Sire, do you know where the 9 cups come from? The 9 yards, marrow ninefold ashet. 8 yards, said Peck. 8. The 9th cup is not a yard at all. It never was. He turned the tablet with one finger so I could see the old script, cut 300 years ago into wax that had gone the color of a bad tooth. The 9th cup is drawn from the sharrow. Bitter mead, thistle and rue mead, sire. They made it in the old garden, and the king drank it last, after the 8th sweet, and the words are written here, and they are not the words we say now. The hall behind me was full of the noise of a country packing for its own harvest feast. What are the words? This one is bitter, Peck read, and this one is the truest, and the king drinks it before his people so that no man may say the kingdom is only sweet. He looked up. It was left off in your great-grandfather's time. There is a note. The 9th cup was thought, sire, this is the word, unseemly. So they filled it from the marrow yard, from the sweetest tun in Comphold, and they have filled it from there every year since, for 41 years, and every king has raised it and pronounced the year good, and not one of them, sire, not one, has ever tasted anything bitter in his life, I said. Peck put his hand over his mouth. I stood at the window a long while. Below in the dark the carts were coming in off the Clover Road, the whole sticky drunken glory of the sweetening rolling up to my gate, and away east beyond it all, past the hedge bank, 12 acres of ugly green were roaring quietly to themselves in the dark. Peck, I said, ride to the sharrow tonight. Ask her, ask, do you understand me, ask whether there is any of it left. He was at the door when I heard my own voice again. And Peck, tell her the king means to drink it in front of the court, and ask her from me whether she will stand where she can see. Harvest Court of Comphold is held in the open, in the yard below the east door, because no hall in the kingdom can hold the number of people who come. They build the king's table out of hive boards. That is not a symbol either. It is simply that there are 10,000 hive boards in Comphold and 11 tables, and somebody 3 centuries ago did the arithmetic. They set the 9 cups on it at noon. Silver, all of them, all the same, and I had raised those cups 11 times and never once looked into them. The yard was full by the middle of the morning. Every bee master, every guildman, every mill village for 11 miles, and behind them the yard boys and the ashmen and the 2 who fight about the water, and up on the granary roof, a row of children with their legs hanging over the edge. The whole country was sticky. The whole country was half drunk. The air was so loud with bees that the man beside you had to lean in to be heard, and everyone was stung, and nobody said so, because to complain of a sting during the sweetening in Comphold is to announce that you were not raised properly. Ilse Bracken stood at the end of the 3rd row, where the bitterkeeper's stool has stood since anyone can remember, next to the gate, so that she can leave without disturbing the table. She had not come to me since Peck rode out. I had not gone down. I had 8 days of a country to move and a law 300 years old to break in front of it, and I would like to say that I bore the separation like a king. But the truth is that I stood at my window at dawn on each of those days like a fool, and my chest was quiet, and I discovered that I disliked the quiet more than I had ever disliked the noise. Delter read the year's yields aloud. He read them as they had been given to him, and they were good, and the crowd made the sound a crowd makes when it is told what it already believes. Then the Mead Guild's man raised the first cup and gave it to me, and I stood up. I hiccuped. 4,000 people heard it. I have been in a shield line when it broke. I have stood at the head of a column with arrows coming in flat out of the sun. I tell you honestly that neither of those things asked as much of me as standing on a hive-board table in front of my own country with a silver cup in my hand, and a noise going off in my throat like a stone in a well. And I want to be clear about what happened next, because it matters, and because for years afterwards it was told wrong. They laughed. The whole yard. 4,000 people, drunk on their own honey, laughing up at their king, not cruelly. I have never claimed it was cruel. It was the laugh you give a dog that has walked into a right. It was warm. It was the sound of a country that loves the man on the table and does not for one moment fear him, and it went on for some time, and I stood in it and felt my ears burn and understood, standing there with the cup shaking, that this was the laugh she had lived inside for 9 years. Except that in her case it never stopped, and nobody ever said sorry. I hiccuped 4 more times. That is 5, I said when I could. There will be 9, there always are. You may laugh through them, I have grown used to it. And they did laugh, and the sound changed as it went, because a crowd is not stupid, and a man who tells you what his body is about to do is doing something other than being embarrassed. 9 silence. I drank the first cup. It was marrow mead, pale gold, and it was the sweetest thing in Comphold, and I turned it on my tongue for the first time in 11 years and thought, I have never noticed that this is cloying. Ash it, said the Mead Guild's man, and gave me the second. I drank it sweet. 9-fold, sweet and thinner, and I thought of Ganner in the rain digging. The third, the fourth. The fifth is Brackenyard Mead, which is named for a family and not for her family, and I have never learned whether that is a coincidence, and neither has she. The sixth, the seventh, which is the little coombe, and which every child in Comphold is given a thimble of on their nomming day. The eighth. 8 cups of honey wine in a hot yard at noon, and the hum roaring, and 4,000 people watching their king's throat move, and every single one of those cups was sweet. And by the 8th my mouth was thick with it and my teeth ached, and I could not, if you had asked me, have told you what the 8th had tasted of, because there was nothing left in my mouth to taste it with. That is the whole of the kingdom in one sentence, and it took me 11 years and a hiccup to arrive at it. By the 8th you cannot taste anything. The Mead Guild's man reached for the 9th cup. No, I said. I said it quietly, and the yard heard it, because a crowd hears a quiet word from a table when it has been shouting at itself all morning. "Sire," said the Mead Guild's man. I took the 9th cup out of his hand and held it up, and the sun came down into it, and it was pale gold, exactly like the first, because it had been drawn that morning from the sweetest tun in the Marrow yard, as it had been drawn every year for 41 years, since a man decided that the truth was unseemly and wrote it in a ledger and went to his dinner. "What yard is this from?" I said. Silence, and then from somewhere, "Marrow," a helpful shout from a helpful man who wanted to be useful to his king. "Marrow is the first cup," I said. The yard did not move. "The 9th cup of the 9 tastings," I said, "is not a yard. There are 8 yards. There have always been 8 yards. I have raised 9 cups at this table for 11 years, and it never once occurred to me to count." I set it down. "The 9th cup is drawn from the Sharrow. It is thistle and rue mead. It is bitter, and it was drunk last, after the sweet, by every king of this country for 260 years, and the words that go with it are cut in wax in my own muniment room, and they are not the words we say now." I found Peck at the table's foot. He had gone the color of the wax. "Read them," I said. And my steward stood up in front of 4,000 people and read, in a voice that shook and did not stop. "This one is bitter, and this one is the truest, and the king drinks it before his people so that no man may say the kingdom is only sweet." Nobody laughed. "My great-grandfather struck it out," I said. "The note is in the same book. The reason is written down. He thought it unseemly." I let that sit. "And since that year Compold has drunk 8 sweet cups and a 9th sweet cup, and has grubbed out its bitter hedges one by one to plant more clover, 40 acres in my father's time and 11 in mine, and I signed the writs. I am not accusing my great-grandfather. I am telling you that I have signed the writs. And I am telling you what is happening in our hives." Then I told them. I did it as she had done it to me in her square, laborious voice, and I did not make a speech of it. Hive by hive. Brood counts. Winter combs at under 9 pounds out of old Marrow's own book, and old Marrow standing up in the second row, 68 years old, in front of everyone he had ever known, saying, "Aye, that's mine, that's true, I wrote it," and sitting down again. The map. The gray veins running through the country in her grandmother's time and the 12 acres left of them. The gut going soft, and the brood going soft, and the wet spring in 3 years or 5 that would take the lot of it in a fortnight, not a bad year. The year and the entire sweet fat drunken glory of Compold going quiet all at once, everywhere in the same week. "You will want to know whose word this is on," I said. I looked down the 3rd row to the gate. "It is on the word of the keeper of the Sharrow, who has written it every autumn for 6 years to my steward, and who was answered once, and who kept writing anyway. It is on the word of the woman whose name we have made into a word for a thing that is necessary and unpleasant and had better not sit at the table." My voice was not steady. "I have stopped pretending it was. I have used that word. Ganner has used it. My father used it to her mother. Nobody in this yard has ever hated her. That is the part I want you to understand, because I have had 3 weeks to understand it, and it has cost me everything I thought I knew about ruling. Nobody hated her. She was simply never anyone we had to answer." And I picked up the 9th cup, the false one, the sweet one, and I turned it over and poured it out on the ground. 4,000 people watched Compold's best mead go into the dirt. "Peck," I said. He came up with the jug. She had sent it 3 days before, 1 jug, the last of the old brewing, made in the Sharrow by her grandmother's method in a year when there was still enough thistle to spare. And he had carried it up the yard through that whole crowd, holding it against his chest like an infant, and his hands were shaking so badly that he set it down twice. It went into the silver cup dark, not gold, green-brown, the color of a pond, and the smell came up out of it into that hot, sweet yard like a window opening in a sick room. I raised it. "This one is bitter," I said, "and this one is the truest, and the king drinks it before his people so that no man may say the kingdom is only sweet." and I drank it. I will not tell you that it was pleasant. It was appalling. It went down my thick sugared tongue like a hand scraping a plate, and my eyes ran, and I stood on that table in front of my whole country with tears going down my face from the sheer force of it and my mouth twisted like a boy given his first physic. And then, 3 or 4 seconds after, when the shock had gone through and out, everything came back. I could taste the eighth cup. It was still there under it, and it was good, and I had not tasted it. I could taste the clover on the air. I could taste the smoke off the near yards and the dust of the road and the honey on my own hands. All of it separate, all of it sharp. A whole world of flavor I had been walking through with a coated tongue since I was a boy. I set the cup down and put both hands flat on the hive boards. That, I said, is what we took out. Then I hiccuped. She had come up the side of the yard. I had not seen her move, my eyes were streaming, but my chest knew, the way it had known along every ditch bank in the Sharrow for 3 weeks, and I turned my head, and Ilse Bracken was standing at the foot of my table in her second dress with her hands folded, having walked the length of the third row with 4,000 people falling silent on either side of her, because she was not going to let a man drink her grandmother's mead alone. I hiccuped again, and I want to say that I made a speech, and that it was fine, and that the histories have it right. What happened is that the Alpha King of Compold stood on a table in front of his entire country and hiccuped, and went on hiccuping, and could not get a word out, and that the yard began, very slowly, in one place and then another, to count. 3, said somebody, then a dozen, then the granary roof with the children swinging their legs, 4, 5. I stood there in front of them, with my eyes streaming and my mouth full of thistle, being counted. 6, 7. She looked up at me. She had gone red to the ears and her jaw was hard, and there was, in the corner of her mouth, the small crack of something she was refusing to let happen. 8. And I thought, with a clarity I have never had before or since, I am going to say this in front of everyone badly, at exactly the worst moment, and it is the only honest way it could ever have been done, because she has never once had the decency of a private hearing from any of us. 9. Silence. Mistress Bracken, I said. Sire, I am not going to offer you a chair at my council table. Somewhere behind her, Delter made a sound. She did not turn round. You would come, I said, and you would tell them the truth, and they would write a note, and the note would say nothing, and in 10 years you would be a woman with a chair who is still not answered. I have watched it. I did it to you myself 6 days ago in that room. I came down off the table. It is not a long step, and I nearly went over. So I am not offering you a chair, or a wage, or a place, or the keepership made grand, or any of the 11 things I sat up all night arranging to offer you, because every one of them was a way of paying you to be bitter on our behalf, and you have been that for 9 years for nothing, and it has nearly killed this kingdom. The yard did not move. 4,000 people, not one of them drunk any longer. I am going to ask you something else, I said, and you may say no in front of all these people, and I will hold the gate for you myself, and you may go home to your garden, and the hedges will be planted regardless. This autumn, and Ganner will dig them, and none of it depends on your answer. Do you believe me? Yes, said Ilse Bracken. Good, I said. Then I hiccuped, and I heard the whole yard draw breath to start counting again, and I said, very fast before they could, marry me. Nothing, the bees. 4,000 people not making a sound in a yard, so hot the wax was going soft on the tables. I hiccuped. 2, said a child on the granary roof quite clearly, and got her ear boxed. Ilse stood there with her brown hands folded. Then she said, in the flattest voice you ever heard from a woman being asked to be queen, Sire, you're doing this because you can't taste anything. Somebody laughed. It got away from them and was smothered. No, I said. I'm doing it because for 3 weeks you have told me every single day that I am wrong, and I have gone to bed each night better than I woke, and in 11 years of kingship no one else has ever done it once. I hiccuped. 4. And because you have never asked me for anything, and I would like, very much, and for a long time, to be asked for something. She looked at the cup on the table, the silver one, empty, with the green-brown ring dried in the bottom of it. It ruins the Mead trade, she said. It does not, it halves it and saves it. Your council will fight you for a year. Yes. The 4 holds will come for the cloverite when you don't wed in the 12th sweetening, and I am no one, and I bring you no hold and no wagons and 11 acres of thistle that the crown already owns. Yes, I said. Senate Foy has drafted the argument that unmakes that law. It is 9 pages, and it is very rude about my great-grandfather. She rode this morning, and it is on Delter's desk. At the table's foot, my chancellor put his face in his hands. And Ilse Bracken, the bitter keeper of Compold, 34 years old, in her second dress, in front of the whole of a country that had spent 9 years walking around her like a puddle in a doorway, did the thing that I have watched, in my memory, 10,000 times, and that no singer has ever got right because there is nothing in it to sing. She untied the twine from around her wrist. She wound it twice around my 2 fingers, the way you tie a bundle of rue so it does not come apart on the road, and she pulled the knot tight with her teeth, because her hands were full. Then I'll want the 9-fold ditch, the marrowhedge and the 14 east ditches back under bitter by spring, she said, and I'll not be called anything at that table but the keeper, and I want it in the wax. Yes. And you'll learn to cut rue properly, because it's a disgrace. Yes. Then yes, said Ilse, you great hiccuping fool, and the yard went up like a hive struck with a stick. Nobody bowed. I want that recorded. Not one wolf in that yard went down on a knee, because they did not know what they were watching, a queen maid, a law broken, or simply their king on his feet in the dirt with a bit of garden twine round his fingers, weeping from thistle, hiccuping, while a woman in a brown dress told him he could not cut rue. The children on the roof screamed. Old Marrow was shouting something at the sky. Ganner had his fist against his mouth again and was making no attempt to hide it. Peck sat down slowly on the end of a hive board, with his hand on his heart. And Toll, who was 19 years old and had gone to sleep under the table where the shade was, did not wake up. We were wed in the spring, in the sharrow, standing in the wet, because she would not close the garden for a day in the cutting season, and I had stopped trying to make anybody ashamed. The hedges went in that autumn. 9-fold first, then Marrow, then the 14 east ditches, and Ganner dug them with 4 men and then with 40, and the Mead Guild fought me for 14 months and lost, and the yield of Compold honey fell by 1/3 in the 4th year and has never risen again and never will, and in the 6th year there was a wet spring. The wet spring, the one she had told a room of 9 deaf men about in a square, laborious voice. And the hives of the 4 old holds beyond our border went soft and went silent and went, all of them, everywhere, in a fortnight. Ours did not. They came to us for stock. We gave it, and we gave them the rue and the wormwood and the tall purple thistle out of my wife's 12 acres, and it is planted now in 4 kingdoms, and in the ridge country they call it Kingspan, which she thinks is a very stupid name, and in Compold it is not called anything at all any more, because it is simply in the hedges, the way it was in her grandmother's time. There is no white wolf in this story. There never was. My wife has no mark upon her hand and none upon mine. I looked that first spring when she was asleep, and she woke and caught me at it and asked me what in the world I thought I was doing, and I said truthfully that I was checking whether we were destiny, and Ilse said, "Come to bed, Ossian," and that is the last time either of us mentioned it. Whatever passed between us did not come through any of the doors the songs describe. The priest of the Compold shrine has tried, 3 times, to make the 9 tastings into a prophecy. The 9 cups, the 9 hiccups, do you see, sire, do you see? And each time she has looked at him over her tea and said that a body does a thing 9 times because bodies are stupid, and that if it had been 8 he would have found 8 in something. I do not know why 9. I have stopped needing to. But I will tell you what I think at the end of a long reign, sitting where I sit. I think that a man who has been agreed with for 11 years loses the use of some part of himself, the way a hive loses the use of its gut. I think that if she had come to me in the great hall with a map, I would have been gracious and thanked her and made a note. I think that if the mate bond had come to me the way it comes in the songs, a mark, a scent, a wolf gone still, some grand and flattering annunciation, I would have accepted it the way I accepted everything else, as a thing arranged for my convenience, and I would have made her Luna and put her at the head of my table and never once heard a word she said. So it did not do that. It made me ridiculous instead. It waited until I was in front of the men whose respect I valued most, and then it made a small wet knocking noise in my throat 9 times. And it did that again and again, week after week, in the hall, at the treaty, at the council, on the table at the harvest court in front of 4,000 people, until the Alpha King of Compold had no dignity left to protect, and could therefore, at last, be told something. Bitterness in the hedge, bitterness in the cup, and for the king a noise he could not stop, which is the only thing that ever cured him of himself. She is 64 now. The garden is 110 acres, and she still cuts, and her hands are still brown to the wrist, and she still smells of rue, and there is not a house in this kingdom that would not stand up when she came through the door. She would rather they did not. She has said so in the wax. And at the harvest court every autumn, the king of Compold rises and drinks 8 sweet cups, and then the 9th, the bitter, the true one, and weeps in front of his people the way you weep at a bad physic, and says the old words that Peck read out that day. And every year, as the keeper comes up through the 3rd row to stand at the foot of the table, her husband, 68 years old, gray as his wolf was, a king 30 years and no longer frightening to anybody, begins to hiccup. They count the whole yard, every autumn 4,000 voices all the way up. They wait for the 9th. Then they cheer, and my wife looks up at me with her hands folded and the corner of her mouth cracking, and I get down off the table. And I have never in my life been so glad of anything as I am of that foolish noise, which is the only music our marriage was ever given, and which I would not now trade for the singing of the bond in any song in the world.